So I just wanted to say a few words about the reason that we're all here really, and that's to celebrate the work of my very dear and long-term friend, Mr. Ian Moss. I do believe that Mick Nichols was originally down to host the Q&A now, but unfortunately due to illness he's not been able to join us. So instead we have the editor of a part of No Tribe, Matt Davies. He did text me earlier and said he'd been watching lots of Parkinson videos in preparation for this gig. So
I've been watching Grace Jones with Russell Harty, so you better watch himself.
That's pretty much what I said to him. Without further ado, in conversation, Moët and Matt. Thank you.
Wow. I'm blinded on the stage. I can't see anybody. Well, it's good to see you all. Even if I can't see you. I mean, I have to kind of preface this by the fact that I teach in education, and I'm used to kind of sitting in front of an audience. They usually have a PowerPoint and a load of handouts, so this is quite alien to me. And usually the audience is about 30 average age as well. So anyway, it was a delight to be able to edit Moët's book. He approached me, was it November the year 2021?
1673.
Yeah. So do you want to edit my next book? I said, yeah, go on then. And then the next day, an email came through with 165,000 words. And this was before last year's book on the 70s came out, so it was a bit of a daunting prospect, but I have to say it's been one of the most interesting things I've ever done, and it is one of the best books on music that I've ever read. So, thank you, Mo, for giving me the opportunity to do that. So, so A Part of No Tribe is the fourth book, isn't it, I believe, in the last 4 years, is it? 4 years? 5 years? I had to write down, so like 3 years ago you published 100 unhit albums we must learn to love. Crocky Gruber, which was lyrics and music.
Yeah, it's a bit niche though.
Yeah. And then, so A Part of No Tribe is the second in what looks like it's going to be a series of books which are top 1,000 singles from your perspective.
Well, it's a trilogy, simply because
It's a trilogy.
the logic is if J.K. Rowling can write trilogies, so can I.
With the same views.
Nothing wrong with J.K. Rowling.
So, what are the principles behind this series of books then? What made you want to start writing them? You know, why now? And what is it you hope the reader?
The first book I wrote was simply to challenge myself. I tend to get ill through the winter. I get terrible colds and flu, and it was coming up to winter, and I thought, what can I do that's productive? I'll write a book. What shall I write about? Write what we know about. So I wrote about music, and it was easy. And I wrote the first book in 6 or 7 weeks, and not working very hard on it either. You know, that just sort of flowed very easily, and freakishly became a bit of a lockdown sensation. And went to #1 on Amazon's book charts. I'm the best-selling author.
That's for someone who works in academia and, as you know, in a band that produces 1 song a year, and I write about 100 words a year. To write 165,000 words in 7 weeks is miraculous.
The ones that followed were in part due to the situation that we were all in with COVID. Lockdown, and it was about occupying yourself, and you know, we'd all got nothing but time, so I started writing these sort of things.
Yeah. So why these books then? What's the kind of principle and motivation behind top 1,000 singles?
It's
100
it's
a year.
Well, it's an alternative view. You know, we all like music. That's why we're here. But I think there's a an orthodoxy about music criticism. So what you get now on these music sites on Pitchfork and things like that are people in the 30s and 40s, and they'll try and tell us what was great in the 70s. And all they're doing, essentially, is echoing what Lester Bangs and Nick Kent and Charles Shaw Murray wrote and their opinions from because they weren't there. I was there. So there's a validity, I think, about what I write. And of course, there's a validity in anybody's opinion. I'm not saying, you know, this is the gospel and I am right. That is very much, the point is, if we've got opinions, we should express them freely. And that's all I've done.
So I mean, there's loads of websites and books, top 1,000 this, top 100 that. I mean, was it a natural thing for you to do to kind of make it listy? Because do you think
everybody loves lists?
Yeah, well, I love it.
Yeah, everybody loves lists.
So what was the process of kind of putting your order and kind of selecting these songs? Were they tracks? Single, because they're all singles, that's right, these are all singles, there's no album tracks in there unless they just happen to be.
Well, it would have been a book that size then, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
It was, the process is to start investigating, looking at what was released in a certain year, going through my own records and my memories, and compiling a list. Now, for the 1,000 selections in this, that was whittled down from perhaps 4,000 original selections. So I have to listen through them all and then sort of grade them for quality and durability.
So, well, I mean, like, you're counting down from 100 to 1. Does that mean that number 100 is not as preferable to number 90? I mean, is there any kind of logic to the order, or is it, or if you can put them together in a certain way?
There's a loose logic, but it is a very loose logic. Although usually I try and pick something good for number 100, you know, the first one of the year.
I mean, when you got to the, obviously, we'll ask about your life a bit later, because obviously a lot of this is to do with your own personal experience of these, but I'm kind of just going to stick to the list for now. So when you got, obviously the first thing I do when I look at a book like this is look at all the number ones, you know, and kind of say, well,
That's cheating.
well, I don't know, you kind of get a sense of what the book's going to be about and whether you're going to relate to it. So did you have that in mind? Did you think that the number one's got to be really, really special, because obviously in the book it's going to be promoted, it's got a page on its own.
The sort of number 100 probably to number 20 are all records that I like, and they're in a loose order. Once I get to 20, I'm sort of on the nitty gritty, and I'm truly picking what were my very favourite singles. So the number ones are a very true reflection, you know, of what I liked and loved and still like and love.
So why is it called A Part of No Tribe? Obviously that's
because that's about the autobiographical part, because obviously we'd reached this point, and you get to a certain age. I was 22 when the 80s started, and you know, most of us have outgrown tribalism by then, and there were lots of tribes. You've got, at the start of the season, you've got all the mods and the skinheads and the after effects of punk. You've got two-tone, and they'd all, you know, new romantics, and it went on and on. It was, the 80s was, I think, very full of tribes, and it was very tribalistic as well. And I found myself as more an observer in that sense.
So even way back in 1980, in the early 80s, were you kind of consciously trying to be part of No Tribe? Because obviously your book in the 70s and all the stuff you talk about the 70s is you know, punk changed your life, you were at Sex Pistols, 2 gigs in Manchester, Free Trade Hall and all that. But yeah, so anybody who kind of just knew you from afar might think, oh, this is going to be a book about punk and post-punk. And that was one of the things that kind of shocked me in a good way, was that once you got past about 81, I wrote it down, actually 1980, I just wrote a few things, because this would be my playlist when I was, so you've got like kind of, just the year 1980, Echo and the Bunnymen, Pop Group, Slits, Undertone, Young Marble Giants, Buzzcocks, Ramones, Blondie, Atom and the Ants, Crass, Fall, Jam, Cure, Magazine, Susie, and so on. Well, it was quite interesting and surprising if we just knew you as the shouting punk singer from Kill Pretty.
That's...
Four candles.
Yeah, four
Well,
candles.
yeah, from afar, people might just know you as this punk guy. But you've got in 1980, you've also got ABBA, Diana Ross, Michael Jackson, Queen, Bowie, Peter Gabriel, and Stevie Wonder, which might be surprising to people, but presumably you're not just kind of adding that retrospectively to try and be...
I was never what my reputation was. You know, there was always more about it. By 1980, you know, I'm not... punk was over for me, certainly, by 1980. Although, against that, I would say that punk as an attitude is always there. You know, Guy Fawkes was a punk, you know, and...
There's a t-shirt there.
Jeremy Corbyn was punk, you know, so as an attitude, it's always there. But as this musical force, I thought it was utterly redundant by 1980. And I wasn't alone, and you start trying to look for a way out of it, a way that you can move out. Now for me, that was to cope. I started going to Northern Soul all nighters and immersed myself in all that soul music. I wasn't doing anything. Jerry Davies was looking backwards at Bluebeam and Ska. You know, Vic Goddard and the Bristol groups were edging towards jazz. Lots of people, you know, there's other people into funk and things like that. People were realising there was all this neglected music that you could go and draw influence from. And you know, so I was walking a different path from what people would perceive me to have walked.
So when you were researching the book then, and you kind of went back and kind of looked at your record collection, were you surprised at how eclectic it was, or did you?
No, I wasn't surprised. As I say, other people, I think, are surprised, but I've always, you know, again, because I'm that age, I wasn't 14 or 15 when punk came along. I've got a history before punk, you know. I've got records by King Crimson and Faust and the Incredible String Band. Now, they didn't all just go in the bin, you know, because the Clash were here or something, you know. I've got this history, and I don't know, I try not to name people, but you have to do sometimes, don't you? You know, I certainly wasn't going to fucking listen to Slaughter and the Dogs when you know, I knew King Crimson got to were fucking rubbish. Sorry. I've just been told that Wayne Barrett's mum's here.
So, why do you think, I mean, the 80s does get a bum rap sometimes, though, doesn't it? It kind of gets represented in a particular way, and I think at the end of your book, I think it's in the afterword, if I remember correctly, you mentioned something about you know, it's not just all Noel Evans and Phil Collins and shoulder pads and things. Why do you think it still has that reputation? Do you think it's just because of the way it's represented on nostalgia shows?
Yeah, well, things get wrapped up, compartmentalised, and sold to you, don't they? You know, so the 80s is a boom industry, and they can sell it to you as all cheery, you know, frippery. When, as we've just heard from the lyrics that Julian Neal read, you know, it was visceral, a lot of it. I mean, you think the 80s, you've got Thatcher, you've got Reagan, you've got the Cold War, you've got Ireland still going on, you've got the start of AIDS, you've got all these fucking horrible things, you know, it was a tough decade. You've got Greenham Common. There was so much grit, so much that artists latched onto and spoke about, so that lasts. It's more inspiring in those days, I think. People spoke out and tried to find a voice than now, when things are utterly shambolic under this regime and regimes around the world. And there seems to be very little constructive criticism of what happens from the arts.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that struck me about the book was that in the introduction to each year, obviously you give some personal perspectives about what you were doing at the time, but
Drinking mostly.
Punctuated by Thatcher, the miners' strike, later on, kind of like for the Berlin Wall, Hillsborough disaster and all those kind of things. So do you think a lot of the 80s music is kind of based on, even the kind of like the happy stuff? Has a dark side? I mean, like Soft Cell and...
Well, yeah, and I mean, Neil read a Soft Cell lyric, you know, it wasn't all happy, was it? You know, they weren't presenting a vision of escapism. Some of the people who did present escapist stuff were doing it almost ironically as an antidote for how bad times were as well. You know, what was happening to us impacted enormously.
So let's talk about decades then, because you've done a book on the 70s, this book is on the 80s, you've got the 90s, I believe, is already
Yes, my brother's editing that between
So, I mean, how artificial is it to kind of label music by decades? Because we talk about the 60s, 70s, the 80s and 90s as if they're kind of discrete units. But I mean, is there a kind of truth to those? Is it worth talking about things in that way? I mean, are they kind of symbolic?
Listen, great music is always great music. I think there's the scramble constantly for something new is unseemly and not particularly constructive, you know, because there's tons of stuff from the 30s, 40s, 50s and 60s that is great music, and it shouldn't just be abandoned because of its age. I mean, they don't do that with paintings, you know, you don't go and see the Mona Lisa and say, oh, it's all right, but where's the fucking modern one, do you? So I understand what you're saying. The decades in that sense are not important, but they're just useful to, you know,
talk about things.
Yeah, to bookend things.
Yeah, but it is interesting because there are kind of symbolic cut-off points, isn't there? So
the
70s was the end of the Beatles and the beginning of, you know.
Yeah, I mean the 70s, you know, for those of us who were there, and there's quite a few. Anybody will tell you that the early 70s really was a continuum of the 60s with this void, this Beatles-shaped void, until David Bowie came along as a major figure. And he sort of killed the 60s then, because there was something new and, you know, and vital about that. And then with the 80s, I don't know, obviously the two-tone thing and all that was a continuum of the 70s, even the new romantics one. But the fact that the new technology came in and synthesizers became affordable, all the new pop, all the Human League and Depeche Mode and Soft Cell and people like that, utilising this new technology, was a real sort of line in the sand moment.
Yeah. That's Tamsin played downstairs, isn't it?
Yeah.
What's it called?
1982. The opening lines of chapter 3, 1982, is, it's the year that finally put the 1970s to bed, you wrote.
Right.
The era of beige and brown was superseded by a bright, shiny, multicoloured aesthetic. So is 1982 like a special year?
Yeah,
Do you see it as a transitional year?
Well, there are transitions. I mean, one of the transitions is video comes in, you know. So before that, you'd only see a band if you went out and saw them on some, you know, in some flea pit quite often. So it's all quite dour. And then all of a sudden you've got this high-spec videos and things like that. You've also got a change in the printed press, where the musical express and sounds and melody maker to a lesser extent had held sway through the 70s. In the 80s, they'd got too stuck up their own arse and they became an irrelevance to the point where smash hits was more important than those periodicals, and the face was a very important thing, and it was presenting things aesthetically as well as musically. So it became brighter, yeah.
The interesting thing about smash hits, because I remember buying them, I've still got the first 100
Right.
stored in a lot somewhere, was it was actually a lyric magazine to start off, and they just kind of reproduced all the lyrics from bands, which was like a really important thing for people when you couldn't hear them and there was no internet and stuff. I mean, so obviously the lyrics in a lot of the stuff that you've chosen in the 80s are kind of crucial to the songs.
Yeah, I mean, that's always been my thing. You know, that's probably why I ended up as a singer. Lyrics always fascinated me. And the music, I never quite understood. I was never able to pick it apart, you know, and as a youngster and say, oh, the bass is doing that, you know, and that's a counterpoint to that. It was just this, the whole, but the lyrics were more special to me.
So if you had to choose, I mean, it's a bit of an awful question, but if you had to choose one of those songs from the top 1,000 in your book, lyrically, could you choose one?
Shipbuilding.
Shipbuilding. Number one, 1982. Yeah. Robert White version or the
Oh, definitely Robert White.
Can
I tell you something lovely about
Please
that?
do.
It would be somewhere in the early 2000s, and I went to Liverpool to see the reformed deaf school, and I was sat with Clive Langer afterwards, who wrote the music for Shipbuilding, and we were talking, and I told him that it was a song that my mother had loved, and my mother used to ask me to sing it to her, and how much it had meant to her. And he got quite teary-eyed, Clive Langer, and he gave me a hug and he said, "Come, give your mum a hug from me, because that's so beautiful." And that was just nice. And it's nice when, you know, people that you admire who've done great work, that you can have some sort of connection with them as well.
What is it about that song specifically? Is it the way it's delivered or the lyrics?
Well, the lyric,
Falklands War, isn't it?
it's about the Falklands War. It's about the fact that a war comes along, so the impoverished shipyards that have been closed down were being reopened, and to feed the war machine. And people pointed out that the wages that these people were earning were blood money, and it's very complicated, you know, the emotions within it. But then Robert Wyatt's voice just...
Yeah, absolutely. And the arrangement.
Yeah.
It's brilliant song. Okay, right, let's go on to you then a little bit, because I remember one of the things that made me laugh last year when I was in the audience and you were being interviewed by Nick was all the anecdotes that you kind of just rattled off from the top of your head. One of them was to do with Norman Wisdom's boat, I think.
Yeah.
Did I misremember that?
No, Bobby out of the Hamsters was a deckhand on Norman Wisdom's boat in the south of France.
So if you don't mind, I'm going to read a short passage, which kind of sums up to me like your life in the 80s, really, and kind of how mad it is. So this was in 1986, so you kind of emigrated to Glossop for a little bit for quiet life, and you got bored with it, I think, that's it. And you came back, you moved in with your ex-bandmate Bob, who's recently...
Who worked for Norman Wisdom.
Oh, did it? Oh, that's him. That's fun. Okay, so you moved in with him. It was a happy arrangement. I was around friends once more. My social life improved considerably. Work was sourced and life was easier. But it almost sounds like you don't kind of like that kind of way of life too much. So I didn't want to fall too readily into unhealthy habits, though, because there were some unhealthy habits. And so to keep myself fit, I joined a full contact karate class.
With my brother.
Oh, right. Unfortunately, I am clumsy and as a result dangerous. So within weeks, I'd broken a sparring partner's leg and it seemed a good time to abandon my martial arts career.
What was really strange about that, and another layer of strangeness, was I'm called Ian Moss, as you know, and I've never met anybody called Ian Moss before I dreamed about myself. And the day that I joined this karate club, the fella in front of me was also joining, and he filled in his form, and then I filled in my form, and the fella who was, you know, taking the memberships looked perplexed because we were both called Ian Moss. And so it was, you know, oh, isn't that fascinating? Anyway, 2 weeks later, I broke his leg. There's only one Ian Moss.
Here we go, right, so after you broke this person's leg, you attempted into fronting a band. So my new bandmates were my landlord Bob and British Olympic wrestler Nick Taylor. Taylor. How did that happen? We rehearsed, so you rehearsed with British Olympic wrestler Nick Taylor. We rehearsed and it seemed pretty good, although our best song was written by 3 female friends, Karen, Sue and Rhonda, who gifted us a spoof country tearjerker called The Horse's Tail. It sounds a bit Father Teddish.
I'm going to sing you the first verse.
Right.
Okay? It was an argument that sent her off the desert to find her true love who'd gone. She rode off on trusty steed Fury. Her heart it was bitter and torn. Her sweetheart was camped by the fire. As Fury went thundering past, he cried out, "But where is my true love? She must have been thrown off. Oh blast! Don't take your horse in the desert. Don't trust the horse that talks back. Live chickens are better than dead ducks. I think that we're on the wrong track." So it's about this talking horse with a grudge against its rider's boyfriend, and it throws her off and draws him into a confrontation. Do you want the last verse? Right. So there's all this padding. Well, we get to the last verse and it goes down and it goes. They met in a ghost town called Dead Rock, and Fury he mowed that man down, down, down. With a smirk he looked over his shoulder and said, "This is a one-horse town."
Yay!
John Peel likes it, other people likes it less.
Thanks, Mo. I have to say, Mo, we had no idea I was going to read that out, so that was completely spontaneous. I had no idea you were going to sing it. I'm amazed you can remember all the lyrics, especially given the next section of this passage, which is. Do you remember writing this? No. No. Did you write it? Was it the band was christened Uchi Comics?
Uchi Comics.
Which, I mean, you put a lot of love into that song, but you wouldn't know it from reading the
Oh,
text of the
right,
book.
that song.
Oh, right, yeah. The band was christened Uchi Comics, which seemed stupid to me. We played a debut gig, and high on adrenaline, it was a triumph of sorts. A second gig, a week later, found me pondering what on earth I was doing this for mid-set. You were thinking that mid-set, yeah. I had no faith in the band or our material, and so to the amazement and shock of my fellow performers, I delivered a Ziggy Stardust speech and retired from the stage to a barely interested audience.
See,
well done.
when I criticise other bands, sometimes people should remember I can be equally self-critical, and the Uchi Comics were fucking rubbish.
So, I mean, that kind of, I mean, you know, don't take this the wrong way, but until we met you and having kind of shared a stage and all this about 10 years ago, I'd never heard of the Amsterdams, and I didn't know who you were. So, is it the case that you've kind of always been on the fringes of fame, but not quite made it or wanted to make it?
And that's
Is that a deliberate thing?
No, it's not deliberate. You know, when you're young, you want, you know. I never sought fame, but I'd have loved to have been in a position where music paid me. You know, where I didn't have to do jobs and things like that. So no, it's not deliberate. But it's, I think, over the years, it's been a happy accident because I've never had to second guess an audience's expectations. I've never had to compromise one iota, and I never fucking have either.
Yeah, hence the title of the book, which is brilliant. I mean, some of the anecdotes in here kind of show you on the cusp of fame, kind of almost getting there. So I'll just name some things and you can decide which one to talk about. So, Made in Britain, Supergroup in 1986, Mark E. Smith, and then there's also the Bay City Rollers Well,
I got beaten up by Eric Faulkner out the Bay City Road. And it was my fault. Again, I can be self-critical. I drank too much. The boardwalk, which by and large put very credible bands on, for some reason had booked Eric Faulkner's Bay City Rollers one Saturday night, and I went along with a friend, and the rest was made up of women who had been girls at the height of roller mania. There wasn't many people there, about 50 people there, and so it was lackluster, you know. Every time they played an old song, the girls would dance around and have fun in a sort of half mocking way, and as soon as Eric Faulkner said this is a new one, everybody went to the bar. And I was drunk, and I started making what I can only truthfully describe as bitchy comments to Eric Faulkner to demean him. And he took exception to it, and he swung at me. I thought, he's only a fucking Bay City Roller. So I swung back at him, and then I realised he was enormous. He wasn't skinny,
they come from the rough end of town.
he was miles bigger than me, this big, hairy Glaswegian. And he cracked me, and and then he cracked me again. I was saying, let me at him. There's people pulling us apart, thankfully. So
a Shang-Lang, basically.
oh, I've got Shang-Lang, yeah.
What about this super group that you're in then? I mean, you can name drop some really big names, you can.
I have not got a regular band. I played occasional gigs and did occasional recordings. I used to basically borrow Mark Riley's band, The Creepers, from Mark. And there was a night in the Hacienda, and I bumped into Mike Joyce, who was then at the height of Smithton. And I said, I'm going to do some recording, do you want to come and record with us? And he said, I'll have to ask Morrissey and Mark, although he referred to Morrissey, even at that point, as that Stretford dickhead. So he went and got permission off his bosses, and Julie came and recorded with us. So we've got Mark Riley on the guitar and Mike Joyce, and then and I was too drunk and spoiled it all, and I sound like a fucking wounded rhino on it. It's fucking awful. And then a few weeks later, we were going to do a follow-on recording. All this is while the Smiths were recording their last album, called Strange Ways They Come, yeah. So we were privy to the Smiths breaking up, who Mike was telling us, you know,
You caused it, probably.
yeah, it's probably, yeah. Anyway, a few weeks later, we're going in the studio again, and I bumped into Peter Hook at the Library Theatre, the Nico gig, after Andy Warhol had died. And I said, oh, do you fancy coming back playing bass on something for us? He says, well, I've got a studio now, you know, what used to be Cargo, Sweet 16, come in there. So gathered the band again. Mike Joyce, the Smiths had now split, and Mike, this is how sort of tenuous the music business was at the time. Mike asked me, and I fully understood, his position was not nice, and he asked me if I could pay him a session fee. He only wanted 40 quid, but I just thought I can't have one person pay for nothing. So I said, no, I'm sorry, mate, can't do it. So Paul Hanley drummed, so I got Paul, Peter Hook on the bass, Mark Riley, and this musical god fronting it all.
Are they recording?
Oh yeah, there's recordings, yeah.
Officially released?
No, I've only ever officially released one track of it.
You mentioned Paul
Which was a cover version of Screaming Lord Sutch and Heavy Friends track, yeah.
You mentioned Paul Hanley, actually, and I was just skim reading the introduction to the 1970s book, which he wrote the preface to.
No, he wrote.
What was it? Oh no, was it?
He wrote Crosby Gruber.
Crosby Gruber, right? Okay. And it was interesting then that he said when he was touring with the Fall and the Hamsters were supporting in the late 70s, presumably, and he was only about 16, and he'd just been asked to join the band. I think he had to leave, didn't he, to do his GCSEs or something like that. But he said he was terrified of you.
No, not of me.
Yeah, no, he does it. He said, he did in the introduction, which I found kind of amazing, given that Mark Smith was his boss. And
No, yeah.
Did I kind of misread that anyway?
I don't know. There's a few things.
You led them away, drinking away from the
Yeah,
boss.
we led them astray.
You led them astray.
We got them into trouble because they'd gone by the party line up to that point. You know, they were in the fall, so they were deadly serious and didn't talk to people. And we made them start dancing instead, going out and enjoying themselves, which Mark didn't like. And that led to the incident then in Australia where they got up dancing to the Clash, and Mark went and thumped Mark Riley, and he thumped him back and gave him a black eye. So that was our fault. So then Mark wrote a track called The Middle Mass on Slates, which is an attack on Mark Riley while he was still in the band. Very nice. And we are characterised in that song as Mark's Drugs and Cider Babes. Yeah, that's Hamsters.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the fall kind of heavily represented in the book. I mean, just about all of the singles, which to me as a Fall fan was kind of great. But also, you've also, I mean, some of the most selected artists juxtaposed with the fall, which probably no other book would happen, are Prince, who's probably got most. I should have counted that. He's got about 15 entries in there. Madonna, Pet Shop Boys, Soft Cell, Michael Jackson, and the Go-Betweens seem to be the ones that you've gravitated towards. Can you explain?
They made a lot of great records, you know. If Mark Stewart had made more records, it'd have been prolific. I mean, every single that Mark Stewart released is in there. You know, it's not. I don't know. I just like the records. I mean, Prince was a genius, wasn't he? You know, Michael Jackson, no matter what the court of public opinion thinks, you know, and it weighs heavily against him, he made some absolutely brilliant records. Madonna changed music, changed the perception of what a woman could be in music. And the Go-Betweens were beautiful, absolutely fucking sublime, brilliant songwriters and performers with heart.
Yeah. I agree, having now listened to them, but I didn't really know much about them before, so I've learned loads about these bands. Right, okay, another important. Oh yeah, so that would lead me on to your clubbing life as well. So obviously the Manchester club scene seems to be very important to you in the 80s. Obviously the Hacienda.
Yeah, I was the right age.
Rafters. I mean, how does that compare to like the club scene now? I mean, was it?
I don't know. I'm fucking 66.
Too old. I still go to clubs.
I'm arthritic.
No, you don't.
Well, tell me what. Can you explain what it was like? Can you kind of remember?
It was great. I mean, I remember at the start of the 80s. You see, it's all such a heady rush, isn't it? You know, when you're young, and it's just what you do, and it's what your friends do. It's where you mix and you exchange ideas. So, and people liked me. At the start of the 80s, I must have been, club owners perceived me as what is now called an influencer. And they used to give me VIP cards to swan in past queues. I've got about 7 of these, you know, for good clubs in Manchester. So yeah, in you go. And they thought that flocks of gullible fashion victims would follow me in. Fucking sadly mistaken there. So it's great, that's the end. I mean, come on, it's magnificent. We were so lucky. I'd always been very down on Factory. I was part of, you know, the sneering anti-Factory thing, you know, used to call them Factory all the time. But that's the end was a gift. Yeah. It was brilliant.
Yeah. So, a lot of the stuff in your book is includes kind of Chicago, Detroit house music, and a whole load of names which I wrote down. Juan Atkins, Patrick Cowley, Frankie Knuckles, Ron Hardy, Steve Silk Hurley, Marshall Jefferson, a load of kind of people who were influential in the early 80s. Did that come from your clubbing experience, or did you kind of...
Yeah, quite often you'd hear records in clubs, you wouldn't particularly know what they were, you know, because DJs, there'd been a change there from the 70s. DJs didn't tell you what they were playing, but yeah, it seeps into you. Yeah.
Right, I don't want to... How long do you want to go on for?
I don't know. How long do you want it to go on for?
I've got a right. I want to kind of just go back to the writing process, if you don't mind, because you said it only took 7 weeks to write them. So I mean,
No, the first book took 7 weeks. These took considerably longer.
Yeah.
I really care about my art now.
So the entries seem to consist of like kind of some information, some kind of background information. So presumably you had to do some research, but then obviously an appraisal of each song as well. And it's actually, I mean, I've tried, and it's very difficult to write about music in a way that isn't repetitive. But you seem to be able to describe how it makes you feel and the kind of like objective elements of the music in a very eloquent way. Did it just come naturally? Did you?
I try and write from a personal perspective, so I'm not interested in, you know, if somebody used a DC-84 drum machine and things like that. It's not at all technical, it's all about emotion for me. That's what music triggers for me, and I try and write from that perspective.
What about the kind of information and research? I mean, did you have to, was a lot of it just from your head? Did you just remember facts?
50-50.
One of the things, I'll finish in a minute, I'll get some questions from the audience, but one of the things that struck me, well, there's 2 questions actually. The first one is, one, you can talk about Smith.
Yeah.
One of the things that it must be tempting to do is to kind of perform a certain way now, pretending that you'd like stuff that you didn't like, and then kind of ignoring stuff that you would have liked then, but that's uncool now.
If you know what I mean. Rewriting is.
Yeah, well, but it struck me because I know you've slag off certain, especially Manchester bands now, looking back. But what I've found kind of refreshing was you were quite honest about it. You still included bands that perhaps you would be sneery about now. I mean, I don't really want to mention any names. Like Paul Ballard.
Yeah, Paul.
I mean, there's a few Style Council ones.
Yeah, I quite like the Style Council. I thought the Jam were a pretty good singles band. I didn't think they were great. I thought all the LPs were patchy. I thought the Style Council was interesting and it was a brave move. And then as soon as the Style Council split up and he's just started copying Traffic and fucking Nick Drake, it was a complete load of shit.
But did you have to kind of think twice about including some of these people who you liked them but you dislike now?
Just be honest with yourself.
Yeah.
You know.
Let me just read. One of the other things I found refreshing was that you kind of veer towards songs which are extremely depressing and kind of like heart-wrenchingly.
It's my melancholy soul.
Yeah, but also kind of very positive thing. So one of my favourite entries actually, and the way you write about it, is the Elvis Costello track "I Want You," which is the #1. It's a spoiler, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's number one in 1986. So I'll just read this out and we can contrast it. So "I Want You." Not only is this one of the most blood-lettingly naked songs ever written, laying bare jealous, ugly emotions, it is equally one of the most painful and intense performances committed to wax. Lyrically, vocally and musically, this song is akin to a framed photograph of a once-loving couple being hurled violently against a wall. Glass smashed, it drops to the floor where it is angrily ground beneath a boot heel until it is completely obliterated. "I Want You" is riveting from first note to last, from the opening creepy vocal salvo through the self-lacerating bulk of the song to the final exhausted, self-pitying gasp. Sounds like you're right. Its sound is stark, stripped of romance, a loveless, brutalist dirge. "I Want You" is unforgettable. It relates the painful, bitter and twisted feelings of the narrator at the loss of his lover to another. It cripples and destroys any concept of dignity or self-respect. I Want You speaks eloquently of the darkness inside the soul. It is extreme but full of truth about the flawed nature of the human condition. A genius record. I mean, I think that's a brilliant kind of summary of that. Brilliant song.
Great.
But it's not all doom and gloom. I had to try and find a kind of happy.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of Madonna records.
Yeah, there is,
isn't there, you know.
So this is, just in case people think this is a book about doom and gloom, it's not. It's like full of happiness and joy. So I suppose it down to Patti Smith, number 20 in what year is it? 88. People Have the Power. Written with her husband Fred Sonic Smith, People Have the Power was Patti Smith's first single following the 9-year gap she took raising her children in Detroit. It's an uncynical, open-hearted and optimistic rallying cry for people to band together against oppressors and use the strength of unity to elicit change. It is possessed of great positivity and compassion, no doubt inspired by the desire and hope that the world could be made a better place for her children and other people's children. So I mean, the book to me is kind of punctuated by all these different levels of kind of positivity and negativity, which kind of sums up the 80s, really, doesn't it? It's kind of like the dark side of
It sums up people.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, drink over.
So is that.
Okay, so I think you have some questions from the audience, don't you? Because I'm not that.
We can't see you, so.
Can't see anything going on there. So, would anybody like to ask Moët any questions?
Or Matt.
Don't ask me any questions.
Do you intend to do the same with albums, Ian?
No, I think. Yeah, no, there's a 90s book to follow this, and I think that's the end of my musical criticism. Basically. Yeah. I know, I'm getting old and I'm getting sort of, I don't know, couldn't care less.
Never say never. Never say never.
Yeah, I never say never. I don't know.
Was the 90s, I mean,
The 90s was fantastic.
which is your favourite decade?
I always thought my favourite decade was the 70s, and on a personal level it probably was, because that's when it's exciting, when you're growing into music and your tastes are being defined. But if I'm being honest about the quality of the music, the 80s and the 90s I think were far better than the 70s. Much more substance, much more variety.
Yeah. Good answer. Any other questions?
I've got one.
Yeah, go on.
When we did the podcast, have you ever thought of putting that into book form?
I don't want to write an autobiography. It'd probably open up too many old wounds, and I would probably upset too many innocent bystanders.
Sorry, Phil.
It's all right. It's all right.
Your name's not going to be in lights.
You write it, Phil. You write it.
I will.
Any other questions yet?
Hello, David.
David, favourite song.
I agree with you about the list of things. I like reading these books, I'm looking forward to reading that one, on the toilet, because it is the perfect time and place for me to have a bit of peace and quiet and read these books. That's why people love this book.
Yeah.
Because they're perfect for the book.
They're great for picking up and down, David, being on the toilet or not. I mean, I like to think that if I'd written them in the 70s, Elvis Presley would have gone to meet his maker reading one of my books.
The actual question of what music books do you like to read? I collect music books. I love them. Which ones do you like?
What books? Let me just consider that a moment. I think both of Julian Culp's books were absolutely brilliant. Brett Anderson's book, and I'm not like a huge Suede fan, Brett Anderson's book that leads up to the formation and Suede getting signed, I thought was really, really insightful, great. Cozy Fan Toot's book about a time in Throbbing Gristle, etc. was really good. And I think possibly those are all autobiographies. Possibly the best musical biography I've written was Hellfire by Nick Tosches, which is about Jerry Lee Lewis.
Great, good question. Thanks, Mary. Anybody else?
I'd like to ask you about Mark E. Smith. I'm a great Fall fan. The first time I saw him was in 1978 at Stretford Town Hall. He came...
Who was playing?
Oh! And he came on stage and he said, "We are the Fall, as in barbed wire." And I thought, you've got me for life now. But I've recently read a book by a chap. He contacted everybody who'd ever fallen. Ever performed.
Dave Simpson's book.
Yes, that's correct. And they all, nobody seems to have a really bad word about him.
No, I think the great thing about Mark was lots of people were treated badly by him. Nobody would ever say that Mark was a perfect person,
Yeah.
and he could be brutal in the way he treated his band members. But whereas I think it's telling, as I said before, about Mike Joyce referring to Morrissey as that Stretford dickhead, I think all the ex-Fall members have always had a great degree of respect for Mark. He was a one-off.
But he was a bit of an arsehole, wasn't he?
He certainly could be, but then, you know, we can all be arseholes, you know, let's...
Great.
Yeah, I mean, I love the band.
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
That's what you should judge Mark on ultimately, not his persona. You should judge him on the music that's left behind.
Great, thanks. Last call for questions.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Mr. Doyle.
It's just more, it's fascinating really, and I've skimmed through the book, I've got a copy, and I think I sort of agree with Moët. I always would think that the 70s was the great era of music, you know, the early 70s, and rock music, and Thin Lizzy and Slade, and punk, obviously. But the 80s, and what I think the tribe thing and no tribe, if you have an open mind about music, I think the pop music was fantastic, the electronica and the house music and the rap and hip hop, etc. And there were still great rock bands like the Sonic Youth, etc., etc. We could go through it. But yeah, it's not really a question, it's just a comment about it's such an inspiring book that I think, fucking hell, yeah, I didn't even know that song, and there's another one, and there's another one. And I think I'm a real obsessive, well, I am an obsessive fan of music, it goes without fucking saying. But it opens your eyes to that Michael Jackson, I love Michael Jackson, Madonna, etc., etc. It's really important that people, and I still think we still have tribes now. I don't really like dance music. I only like punk. I only like heavy metal, which is fucking ridiculous, you know. And that's what it's all about. Anyway.
I think that might be a good place to stop. I would just to kind of...
Is everybody happy if we stop now?
Let's
One more question, somebody's got a question.
It's a bit of a niche one. I'm always fascinated with the difference between Adam and the Ants in the 80s and Adam and the Ants in the 70s.
Adam and the Ants were miles better in the 80s when they were a pop group. They were fucking pathetic when they were trying to peddle with some sleazy sex thing. They're fucking open. Yeah, I saw Adam Man about 3 years ago, and he was playing all his pre-pop star stuff at a festival, and he went down like a lead balloon because there's no tunes, no choruses. It's just it's like a slowed down version of Robert Plant when he does all that sex noise. Fucking idiotic, childish.
He did rip off a Rolf Harris song, to be fair. Prince Charming is basically what Henry was. So,
Is that everything, or do we have more?
what I would recommend...
Stephen Dale's got another one.
No, I was going to say I disagree completely. And Dirty Wears White Socks.
Yeah,
Dirty White Socks.
It's all about opinions.
Yeah.
That's fine.
I mean, I was tempted to ask Murray a whole load of questions about why this is in the book and why that's in the book. I'll just ask one.
Yeah, go on, keep going.
Where's the wedding present?
I fucking hate the wedding present. The fucking wimpy fucking rock. It's like fucking Val Doonican with fucking strumming guitars. They've got absolutely nothing to say of any fucking interest. I saw him once and I was on my own, so I was able to walk out after about 2 fucking of the dismal, fucking tuneless, crappy songs. But then the last time I saw him, I was with a fan and I had to stand through it. I was fucking bored shitless.
I said to Susan, I'm going to ask him about the wedding present. She said, he's going to say, I fucking hate the wedding present. You're so predictable.
Thank you, Susan.
What I would recommend when you buy this book, everybody should buy this book, is to put a playlist together. Obviously try and buy some stuff, but put a playlist together and just listen to it in the order in which Murray put them, because the juxtapositions are absolutely incredible. You get like, you go from punk to Chicago, Detroit house music, and all kinds of African music and reggae, and it's just brilliant. It's just so unexpected, and I've learned so much from editing it. So thanks, Murray, for letting me read the book before it's published.
Yeah. Can I have a round of applause for Matt, because he stood in and saying up until yesterday afternoon that Mick Nichols refused to do this. So I think Matt's done a sterling job. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for being here. Make sure you buy several copies of the book. It's presents for family and friends. Get Murray to sign them. And thanks, Murray, for writing a brilliant book. Look forward to the 90s.